So it looks like the Harlequins have got a new detachment fighting from the skies, and one that's significantly better than their Codex one. Let's take a look at what the Serpent's brood can do for the children of the Laughing God. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Harlequins and having a look at the next Grotmas detachment that's dropped for Warhammer 40k in the run-up to the December balanced data slate. So far I feel like this year's new detachments have been doing rather well, a pretty powerful one for the God, and then an improved Night Lords detachment for the Chaos Space Marines, and an improved Death Company detachment for the Blood Angels. Today we have the new Harlequins one, the Serpent's Brood, certainly a sub-faction that needed a little bit of help out there compared with the rest of the armies, and then beyond that there's two more on the way. As per the leaks, the Emperor's Children Court of the Phoenician, and then the Space Wolf Saga of the Great Wolf, both of them sounding like they're going to be revolving around characters in some way, Fulgrim and Logan Grimnar. Then either on the same day as the last one or the one after we'll get the balanced data slate, which is likely to have a fair few more wide-ranging impacts for a bunch of factions. Today though it's Eldari, and more specifically Harlequins. They're the all very mysterious guardians of the Black Library fighting from the Webway. They serve the Eldar Laughing God Segarak and make war as a great performance, fighting to martial perfection and clad in masks and holo suits, dancing their way through enemy formations and bringing death at every turn. They haven't really had any new models since their plastic release in 2015 for 7th edition Warhammer 40k. I believe the only new Harlequin model since then has been Kaiganil for the Adept Sororitas and the Demonofuge. With their small full range release, they became an independent faction within Warhammer 40k, that in 9th edition were rolled back into the core Eldari Codex, as now a bit more firmly in place as a sub-faction of Eldari and Drukhari, though standing a bit apart and getting some rule support for fielding them solo, even if up to now it's not really been very good. It was interesting to see them get a Combat Patrol box set for 10th edition as well, and given that they've always been a relatively niche army to collect in their own right, that one actually did perhaps surprisingly well, being one of the better selling Combat Patrol boxes of 10th edition. I guess quite a nice focus one to expand an Eldari army with, and the first main discount box that they've had. Gameplay wise at the moment, with their focus on allied things, they can be fielded in a few different ways. You can either field them alongside either Eldari or Drukhari armies. You can add their units into Eldari detachments, though they don't get a lot of rule support there, as most of the stratagems and things won't work on them. You can do kind of similar with Corsairs and Travelling players for the Drukhari, and the Drukhari's strongest detachment at the moment is the Reaper's Wager, and that's the allied Harlequin one, so they can get a fair bit of support there, though even there they tend to be kind of limited for how many people choose to play them. There might be none of them, or just a few token units thrown in alongside mostly Drukhari. It did seem that in the core codex they've been rather underserved by their theme detachments, the Ghosts of the Webway one. That one does support them, though it's not really quite enough to carry the strength of the army in competitive play. It's generally had around about a 40% win rate since Codex Eldari came out, and kind of limited play numbers. It does have some interesting stratagems, though it was kind of notable that the core rule was really quite weak, adding very little versus most attachments in Warhammer 40k. As a result, it's one of the game's most notable sub-factions, and an army that lots of people have previously collected as a whole army in their own right. It did seem like a pretty great option to try and help out with detachment buffs in some way or other, as currently Ghost of the Webway just doesn't give enough support to make the small roster of slightly middling Harlequin units actually be able to carry the army in its own right. With that in mind, Games Workshop have given the Harlequins a new detachment to play with. I don't know if they'd think about buffing Ghost of the Webway in some way, either in the upcoming balanced data slate or one down the road, but this one is a new one, and it's called the Serpent's Brood, representing Harlequins fighting from the backs of their transports and vehicles. As a themed one for the small army, it works rather well, as basically every single model can be deployed in a vehicle if you'd like it to be. I guess the only exception being a big massed up troop squad if you wanted to field a big unit of them. The name and the theme have been done before in Warhammer 40k. Serpent's Brood was the name of the rule for the Soaring Spite mask in previous codexes, striking hard from their transports and jet bikes before escaping to safety. The rules here certainly are a bit more focused on their mounted and vehicle units. They do have some generalist support for units that aren't in these vehicles as well. For the core rules of the detachment, they've got an army construction section called Travelling Players. This one gets you the same army construction rules as the Ghost of the Webway. Troops a battle line and become OC2. Being able to have more of those is pretty essential if you want to run them at a higher points level just in general for Harlequins, and also does away with the 1 per army restriction for the non-epic hero characters, so you can have multiple troop masters and shadow seers like you'd be able to in more normal 40k armies out there. This one also won't look at other Eldari units as well, so you could still say use some fire dragons for some heavy hitting anti-tank, maybe some expendable units like infiltrating rangers or corsairs, or small utility aspects. The units will have to justify themselves on their own datasheet strength though, as they can't use the core rule or any of the supporting rules in the detachment, or that's locked to Harlequin models. For the core rule of the army, it's called Boons of the Brood. This one's a nice straightforward damage buff to vehicle and mounted Harlequin units and units getting out of transports. Basically they all get sustained hits 1 on their weapons, both ranged ones and melee ones, and given it applies to the vehicle datasheet, it will also work on firing deck weapons as well, as they count as being mounted on the vehicle. For the disembarking thing, the rule is that Harlequins that disembark this turn will get sustained hits 1 on their weapons, so quite nice extra hitting power for troops and characters launching assaults out of Starweavers. Overall that's a pretty good start as a core rule. Sustained hits 1 is going to be equally effective against everything, just more hits than you'd usually have on your target. It's far better than the almost non-existent core rule that the Ghost of the Webway has, and for a lot of units it's basically going to equate to a plus 25% damage boost. Only things like shuriken cannons with lethal hits aren't going to get quite as much value, as sustained hits won't mean that you get any more lethal hits than you did before. Overall though, that's a good rule. I did think that Harlequins, if you're going to lock them to only supporting their datasheets, did just need something really quite direct to increase the power of those datasheets here. Before we move on to stratagems and enhancements, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Deploymats. They're an Australian-based maker of gaming mats and objective markers and sell things from their Shopify store linked down in the video description. Their most recent new offering are these animated objective markers, quite common battlefield accessories for Warhammer 40k. You have a 40mm circle in the middle and then a 3-inch scoring zone around it, so you can see whether or not models are on the objective super easily. And they've made some pretty fun holographic designs of these, so you can basically see different designs from different angles and then can appear to move a bit as you're using them from different directions. They've got plenty of fun ones with some glowing runes, sort of blood-soaked ground, and some lightning and synapse effects. Their other major offering are their double-sided game mats, quite fun designs that have the 40k deployment zones sort of built into them. Kind of fun to have them as part of the art rather than just an overlay. I quite enjoyed the one that they sent me. I've got a couple of different designs of these. They're often available either as single ones or double-sided ones. I believe they're sold out in Australia but still shipped to much of the rest of the world. In any case, check them out, link down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their stuff, and thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to all very mysterious space elves though, and next up we have the Stratagems of the Serpent's Brood. For one command point we have Fangs of the Brood. This one basically gives a troop unit all 3 Dance of Death rules in the fight phase, so that's reroll hits of 1, a +1 to wound and a -1 to hit. Normally they have to choose their favourite out of those 3. I feel like this is one of the ones that just sounds a little bit better than it is really. You're always going to have your favourite and the most impactful out of those 3, which if you're just trying to get maximal melee damage might often be the +1 to wound one, though it might depend a little bit on the target as well. I guess it's nice to have the -1 to hit and the other damage buff on the go. A lot of the time though, if you were going for +1 to wound, it's basically just going to be a +16% damage buff from the reroll ones to hit. I feel like that's kind of low usefulness unless you're also getting value out of the -1 to hit, and that's only going to matter if the opponent's hitting you back in some sort of meaningful way as well. Perhaps that could come in handy if you've killed something and then consolidate into something else. Either way though, it's not unusable but doesn't really feel like a particularly high yield stratagem to me. For one command point we've got Venomous Wrath. This gives you move shoot move for Harlequin's vehicle with a 6-inch normal move, and if you do use this then you can't charge after. Some fairly standard Eldari shenanigans there, basically firing and fading. You could have a Void Weaver get a line of sight on its target with its sustained hits 1 weapons, and then hide behind a ruin or back 6 inches away so there's less chance that you might be able to shoot it back with its rule. Or could do other things like just gaining speed and moving a Starweaver further up or something, pushing onto an objective, or maybe putting a Starweaver in the place where you're likely to be able to re-embark into it again. It does seem like quite a handy stratagem to have, though maybe just a little bit more on the limited side due to only affecting the Harlequins' vehicles. They're not really all that big or points intensive. Next up, for one command point, we've got Weaver's Coils, which feels like it could be one of the highest yield stratagems in the detachment. You use this on a mounted unit, so basically the Skyweaver jet bikes, and then at the end of your fight phase, you can either fall back 6 inches, or if it was eligible to fight and now is unengaged, usually when you've charged an enemy unit and wiped it out, you can make a full normal move, and that's really quite a big deal for Harlequins, given that would be a big 14-inch move with the Skyweavers. At least on paper this could be really quite a powerful one. Basically have a squad with Zephyrglaives, zoom them up to the enemy, shoot them with guns, and then charge them and hopefully wipe them out in close combat with a bunch of their damage to melee attacks. And then after you've done so, use this stratagem and use it to get safe. 14-inch move is really quite big. Hopefully you can hide behind an enemy ruin and escape enemy reprisals, so basically destroy one of their units for not losing one in return. In the right circumstances, if they can charge the right thing, that could be quite big. But bear in mind it's your fight phase and you can't use it in the opponent's one, so you can't use this as a sort of pseudo fallback shoot and charge. Next up, for one command point, we've got Weaving Stride. This one's a reactive move for Harlequin's infantry. A fairly standard issue one where if the enemy ends a move within 9 inches of you, you get to make a normal move. Your infantry unit gets to make a normal move of 6 inches. Unrestricted reactive moves like this are generally pretty excellent to have in Warhammer 40k no matter where they are. The usual biggest impact is if you have a unit that's exposed and then the enemy moves up nearby to deal with them, and then you're able to hide them behind a ruin or keep them safe from a charge. You've basically just saved an entire unit with one command point, and that's usually going to be a really big deal. This one could be extra relevant if there's plenty of Star Weavers around, given that you could use the move to re-embark in a transport. That's another really quite good way to keep them safe. And it could also be a very interesting one for the Harlequins lone operatives as well, particularly the Solitaire. That's a unit that's really quite scary and fast moving, and well worth keeping safe for a command point if you can. Next up, for one command point, we've got Striking Stride. This one's a straightforward advance and charge stratagem declared in your charge phase, so you do get to see where your advance moves have taken you before you declare this one, maybe just a tiny bit more information than other ones elsewhere. Advance and charge is a nice straightforward one, always good to have for delivering melee units where they need to go. Harlequin troops with characters and Skyweaver jet bikes will both enjoy this, and you could also combine this with battle focus as well if you want your squads to move even further. Finally, for one command point, we've got Skyward Lunge. A vehicle or mounted unit returns to strategic reserve at the end of the enemy fight phase if it's not an engagement range. These units don't have deep strike, so will be coming from the edges of the board as more normal strategic reserves later on. Often these ones are fairly handy ones to have for late game utility, say if you want to threaten the enemy's home objective when they've not got so many screens left, or potentially just be in places to pop up and either deal damage with some shooting, or get in the right place for secondary objectives. It is a nice enough one to have with that, maybe just feels a little bit less overwhelming in the context of Harlequins where everything moves pretty fast, and you can't use it on any one unit where their shooting is really overwhelming. Maybe a Void Weaver or 4 Skyweavers being the best shooting that you're going to get. It's still a handy one to have for the overall objective game though. Then finally we have the enhancements. There's one for any of the characters, then one each locks to each one of the generic Harlequin heroes. The Key of Ghosts is the unrestricted one. This one gives you scout 6 inches for models in the bearer's unit, and this one specifies that it isn't for the Solitaire, though that is kind of curious that they state that given that it's an epic hero. It could easily just be some redundant wording, unless they're going to do something unexpected like remove epic hero in the balanced data slate or something. Scout 6 inches is handy enough to have for an army with some pretty big threat ranges like Harlequins. That's going to be able to get your units really quite a long way if they want to. And you could use this for say a troop master with a troop in a Star Weaver transport. It definitely doesn't hurt to have. Feels like the troop master seems like the most logical place to put this. Whether or not it's actually good or worth it will depend on the points cost though. Next up we've got Weaver's Wail. This one's a fairly straightforward damage buff to the Troop Master. He gets +3 strength and +1 attack on his melee attacks, so normally that'll be 6 attacks at strength 8, AB 2 and damage 2, hitting at weapon skill 2 with devastating wounds, a +1 to wound built in on his profile, and then potentially in this one maybe sustained hits 1 from the detachment rule. For the enhancement point of view, going from strength 5 to strength 8 is a fairly solid boost. You'll be wounding most infantry, even heavy infantry, on a 2+ with his inbuilt datasheet rule, and also at least fairly punchy against tanks and vehicles, wounding them on a 4 most of the time. If that one doesn't turn out to be ridiculously expensive, it seems fairly solid. Then for the Death Jester, we've got Fanged Leer. This one allows you to have 2 of his shooting buffs rather than 1, so say you could have sustained hits 3 plus either ignores cover or precision. That's either going to make him just a fair bit shootier, averaging around about 4 hits turn on turn, but it's going to be very swingy depending on how many 6s you roll. A lot of the time it's going to be either 6 hits or so, or 2 or 3. If you roll a 6 on his 3 dice when he targets an enemy support character, there's at least a pretty reasonable chance that you might well be able to kill it in 1 round of shooting with this. Death Jesters are considered a bit on the pricey side for what they do at the moment, and I'd certainly consider them fairly second tier lone operatives for the Harlequins after having a Solitaire. Again, one of the ones where I think it could be interesting if it is dead cheap. If it's expensive, then it's not really going to help out the Death Jester all that much. Finally, we've got the Shedskin Raiment, which is a Shadow Seer one. This allows you to redeploy 3 Harlequin units. It could perhaps be okay for a bit of misdirection or refusing a flank or something. Harlequins do move fast and are easy to hide though, and as a result there might be a fair few times where you just don't really want to change your game plan all that much from where you've deployed them. There's usually not going to be too much reason to flip things into reserve either, given their big movement abilities. Overall, between all that, it certainly feels like a big step in the right direction for the Harlequins. This one certainly looks stronger than the Ghost of the Webway if you do want to try and make a mainly Harlequin army work, and as a result it certainly seems a direct improvement for Games Workshop there. Again, Harlequins were one of the things that you could really point at for Warhammer 40k game balance. A sub-faction now, but plenty of people still collect them in quite a big way. And really nice to see them get a pretty direct upgrade. Compared with the Ghost Detachment, probably the single biggest thing is the core damage rule, just giving you some raw extra strength on the datasheets, rather than getting almost nothing from the Ghosts one. It does feel pretty well exactly what they needed. Harlequins just needed a bit more strength if you're going to have them as the core of the army and make them work. For the stratagem support options, I think the charge, kill and escape stratagem for Skyweaver jet bikes will be a particularly big one. Having 4 of them with Zephyrglaive, zoom in, delete something, and not face enemy reprisals seems like a pretty great deal overall, and the other stratagems are quite nice as well. Advance and charge is good to have. Auto 6-inch reactive moves are always nice. Return to reserves is a staple, and the move shoot move one could be interesting for some vehicle utility. I feel like maybe the troop melee damage buff isn't really so standout though. For the enhancements, I'm not really quite so convinced at these. If they do wind up at somewhere in the sort of 20 point kind of mark, if any of them are unexpectedly cheap, then all well and good. The Fighty Troop Master maybe seems like one of the best out of them. The Scout 6 inches does seem like another fairly solid one too, but both of those will be dependent on the points cost. Again, at first impressions for this one, I wouldn't guess that the Harlequins are going to be an all-around powerhouse army with this. I'd guess it's still probably not going to be enough to carry them to be, say, one of the more central ways to play Eldari. They certainly seem far more powerful than they were before, and you can back up the Harlequins with a few Eldari units that can do enough with their data sheets unsupported to round out the army. For weaknesses for these guys, really big damage output to take down enemy tanks and heavies feels like one of the biggest things that you can point at. Maybe some friendly Fire Dragons or Phoenix Lords could help out with that, and otherwise wanting maybe a few expendable units, maybe some Rangers or Corsair Void Reavers wouldn't be the worst there. Let me know your first impressions of the Harlequins detachment though. I look forward to your comments down in the comments below. I'll leave that there for now though. As mentioned, a big thank you to Deploymats.com for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, links down in the video description, with their objective markers and their deployment zone marked battle mats if you'd like to take a look over their range. That's it for this one though. I guess I'll be back tomorrow either for Emperor's Children or Space Wolves, so check back on that one if you'd like to see more. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this, and support the channel on the Patreon page if you'd like to keep these videos coming. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.